Good evening, afternoon, or morning. Movie Cat is at the microphone. Today I will tell you a story about a person who wanted to achieve an ideal result at any cost, but instead organized an orgy in the central square. For your attention, a dramatic thriller from 2006. Perfumer, the story of a murderer.
What do you want?
And in order not to lose this channel, I recommend you to subscribe. France, 18th century. A man shackled is led out of the dungeon into the square. A crowd of people curses the criminal and demands his immediate execution in all possible harsh ways. The guard reads that Jean-Baptiste Grenouille will be tied to the cross, and then the executioner will crush the joints in his arms and legs and leave him to suffer until death occurs. 20 years earlier, Paris, fish market. A pregnant woman is trading behind a counter when suddenly she goes into labor. She gives birth right under the counter, cuts the umbilical cord with a fish knife, and leaves the baby to die on the ground. She has done this 4 times already, but this time people notice the child. For attempting to take the life of a child, his mother is sent to the gallows. The orphan is placed in an orphanage, where he continues to fight for his life. Older children, for fun, try to strangle him, but the baby is protected by the owner of the orphanage, Madame Gaillard. One day, at the age of the 7th, Grenouille realizes that he can smell and distinguish many different smells at a great distance. From an apple blossom to a dead rat. From that day on, he experiences the world through his sense of smell. After some time, the owner of the orphanage sells the boy for 7 francs to a local tanner for a leather farm. On the way back, the owner of the orphanage is killed by robbers. Usually, workers on a tanner's farm can't stand even 5 years of hard work, but Grenouille has an incredible thirst for life. He works 16 hours a day and becomes an example of hard work, obedience and discipline. A few years later, the tanner takes the grown guy with him to the market to sell the goods. In the city, Grenouille feels a huge variety of smells that attract him. He stumbles upon a perfume shop and sees rich and noble people admiring the fashionable new fragrance, Amor and Psyche. Suddenly Grenouille smells a wonderful aroma. He turns around and sees a girl selling plums. Having listened to the sensations, he realizes that he was attracted not by the smell of plums, but by the smell of the girl herself. Grenouille follows her through the alleys, leans close to her and begins to inhale greedily. Suddenly the girl turns around, gets scared and wants to scream, but Grenouille tightly covers her mouth with his hand. He waits for people on the street to pass by, but he squeezes her mouth too long and the girl dies. Grenouille is horrified, but not because of the murder. He suddenly realizes that the girl's enchanting aroma disappears very quickly after her death. At the farm, the tanner beats Grenouille for running away. However, this does not bother the guy. He only thinks about how he will learn to preserve aromas, like the one he smelled today. Meanwhile, on the bridge, the once famous Italian perfumer Boldini is trying to unravel the recipe for the fashionable perfume, Amor and Psyche. His beautiful fluffy cat is watching this. Boldini was once a talented perfumer, and in his youth he came up with several truly great fragrances, but the master has long since fizzled out, and now almost no one comes to his shop. In the dead of night, Boldini gives up. He realizes that even if he managed to unravel all the components of Amor and Psyche, he would never be able to find the correct proportions. Suddenly Boldini hears a knock on the door. Grenouille stands on the threshold and says that he has brought the ordered leather from the tanner. Boldini takes the guy into his workshop to leave the leather on the table. Grenouille suddenly says he can subtly distinguish all smells. For example, the master's handkerchief smells of the perfume Amor and Psyche. When Boldini doubts, Grenouille suggests he will mix the perfume Amor and Psyche from the components in the workshop. In desperation, Boldini agrees, but after a minute he is horrified by how carelessly the guy mixes the ingredients. When the perfume is ready, Master makes sure that it is indeed Amor and Psyche. However, Grenouille claims that this perfume is bad because the smell is too strong, and he adds several more components to the flask. Grenouille promises to mix as many perfumes as needed, and in return asks Boldini to take him on as a student and tell him the secret of how to preserve the scent. Boldini believes that the guy is an upstart, and condemning the most brilliant fragrance of the year is unheard of impudence. So the master kicks Grenouille out. However, a few minutes later, Boldini uncorks the flask and realizes that the guy really improved the Amor and Psyche perfume. In the morning, the master buys Grenouille from the tanner for 50 francs. On the same day, the tanner dies absurdly. In the first days of work, Grenouille creates several brilliant fragrances, and all the aristocrats of Paris flock to Baldini's perfume shop. The master admits that Grenouille is a genius, but at the same time just talent is not enough. Knowledge and experience are also needed. The master teaches Grenouille the basics of perfume recipes. They are divided into 12 components and 3 general groups: first impression, main theme, and trace of aroma. There is a legend that the ancient Egyptians allegedly discovered a 13th secret ingredient which made it possible to feel absolute pleasure. Grenouille constantly reminds the master to teach him to preserve smells, and then Baldini shows his distillation cube, which he invented and built himself. Baldini sprinkles a huge amount of roses into a tank of water, lights a fire, and after a while, essential oil begins to drip from the tube, which contains a concentrated rose aroma. The next morning, Baldini is awakened by a loud noise and screaming. In the basement, master understands that Grenouille wanted to preserve the smells of glass, metal and stone, and therefore put all these things in the tank. Horrified, Baldini also takes out his cat from there. Grenouille believes that he was deceived and it is impossible to preserve the smells. He becomes deeply depressed and then develops a fever. Baldini doesn't want the guy to die, so he says that if anywhere he can be taught how to preserve smells, it's only in Greece. All the future best perfumers in Europe live and study there. Baldini agrees to let Grenouille go and even give him the necessary document confirming that the guy is an apprentice perfumer in exchange for 100 new perfume recipes. After Grenouille leaves, Baldini's house on the bridge suddenly falls into the river. Arriving in Greece, Grenouille becomes one of the students of master perfumer Dominique Drouot. One evening, in the hayloft, Grenouille catches and kills a girl whose scent attracted him. Having placed the body into a huge distillation cube, Grenouille again does not achieve the desired result. Even worse, in the morning the master almost catches him doing this. When Grenouille learns of a new scent-absorbing technique, he goes to a prostitute to try it. Grenouille pays for her time, applying animal fat to her skin to absorb the scent. However, when Grenouille takes out a knife to scrape the fat from her skin, the girl begins to resist and Grenouille kills her without any remorse. At night, Grenouille puts all the fat into a small distillation cube he has built in his back room. The resulting essence pleases him, the smell is preserved. Later, Grenouille's sense of smell leads him to the luxurious estate of Antoine Richer, one of the city's first rich men. Grenouille longs to add the scent of Antoine's beautiful daughter, Laura, to his collection. However, in the labyrinth in the garden, Grenouille misses Laura and instead kidnaps 2 twins, who were also guests at the holiday. Early in the morning, Grenouille finishes his work and there are 2 flasks of perfume in front of him. Closing the flask with a stopper, Grenouille spills 1 drop onto his hand. At this moment, an angry Master Drouot bursts into the room to seriously scold Grenouille for the mess. Suddenly the master smells the scent of perfume and suddenly he affectionately asks Grenouille to clean up, unless of course he is busy with anything important. Later, the bodies of the twins are found in the city, naked and without hair. After some time, the guards find several more victims. Antoine Richer announces to the city council that local doctor has found out that all the victims, except the prostitute, were virgins. That is, the reason for murder is not lust. Antoine says that all the girls were young and beautiful, and he also knows that his daughter Laura is the most beautiful girl in the city. This means that if a maniac is engaged in something like collecting trophies, then the local maniac will most likely choose Laura as the crown of such a collection. Meanwhile, Grenouille has already collected 12 vials and he is really sure that Laura should become the 13th secret ingredient. Grenouille watches her and one day he almost grabs the girl. But at the last moment Antoine manages to save his daughter. The next morning, Antoine decides to take Laura out of town. To deceive the killer, he sends his carriage in front of the guards along the main road to the north, and he with his daughter go on horseback in the other direction. However, Grenouille smells Laura, so he leaves Grace and goes after her on foot. Meanwhile, the dog of the murdered prostitute finds the hair of its owner by smell. Having dug it up in the earthen floor of the room where Grenouille lived, Master Duo calls the guards, and they dig up the severed hair of all 12 murdered girls. In the evening, Antoine and his daughter stop for the night. Antoine locks Laura and goes to bed. A few hours later, Grenouille finds the house by the smell, quietly makes his way inside, and takes the key from Antoine's table. In the morning, Antoine opens the room and finds his daughter dead. Later in the day, Grenouille creates the final ingredient from Laura's scent, and then he mixes the liquids from all 13 bottles. While doing this, he is caught by the guards, whom Antoine sent in pursuit. Having returned the maniac to Grace, Antoine tortures him for a long time to understand why he killed Laura, but never receives a clear answer. Antoine then describes Grenouille's upcoming execution. He will be tied to a cross, and then the executioner will crush the joints of his arms and legs and leave him to suffer until death occurs, and then Antoine will go down to Grenouille and drink his blood. Before the execution, the whole city gathers in the central square. Grenouille is freed from shackles and unnoticed by the guards, only God knows from where. He takes out a bottle of perfume and applies a drop to his hand. A carriage arrives at the square. Grenouille emerges from it, dressed in a beautiful suit. He rises to the executioner and he drops the club from his hands. Grenouille takes out a handkerchief and applies a single drop to it. Then he waves the handkerchief and the smell spreads throughout the entire area. The executioner, the priest, the guards, the townspeople, they all now think Grenouille is an angel and, of course, innocent of any murders. From an overabundance of love, all the people in the square undress and have sex, turning the execution into a mass orgy. An angry Antoine descends from the balcony and goes to the place of execution to personally kill the maniac, but after inhaling the perfume, he calls Grenouille the son and asks for his forgiveness. After this, Grenouille goes to Paris, and the townspeople come to their senses and execute Master Duo for the murders of the girls, because the hair and belongings of the victims were found in his house. Meanwhile, Grenouille still has a full bottle of his perfume and can get everything in the world by simply heading to the King of France or the Vatican. However, having fulfilled the mission of his whole life, Grenouille understands that he always wanted to be sincerely loved, and blind worship is not the same thing at all. Grenouille comes to the fish market where he was born. There he sees tramps and thieves warming themselves by a fire. Grenouille pours the entire bottle on his head, and people, blinded by attraction to him, tear him apart and devour the remains. They are sure that for the first time they have committed an act of true love. All that remains of Grenouille lying on the ground is his clothes. Thank you for watching, but orgies in squares might be interesting. Write in the comments whether you are for it or against. Please press your thumbs up and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already.